So obviously you're a very, very popular, big, and expert with Mura irons and clubs. You've been with them a long time. Can you tell the story of how that relationship got started?
Yeah, yeah. Mirror is very important to me. So I started getting customers online in the late 90s, and I built up a clientele online, and people were sending me clubs to reshaft, from Greensboro, North Carolina, or El Paso, Texas. In any event, I had some guys that had contacts in Japan, and they were buying club heads from Japanese dealers, having the Japanese dealer ship these club heads to me in the US to do a build, and they made to ship the product to the customer. I said, great, yeah, send them to me. I'll do them. Well, mirrors were showing up. And I was like, I'd never heard of mirror, and we're going to say it's around 2000. I'd never heard of them, but I knew a good golf club when I had my hands on one, and I was like, these are really, really, really nice. So I built a pretty good number of sets like that over the years. And then in 2003, out of the blue, a representative that was just kind of calling dealers or calling club builders about Mira called me. And he said, would you be interested? I said, yeah. And not only am I interested, I've already built your product. He said, what? I said, yeah. I said, people have been sending me those heads for a couple of years, and I've been building them, and I knew they were really good. I just didn't know how to contact the Japanese company. And
Let me back up a minute. How did you ever find out how they knew to contact you? Like, they called
well,
you. How did they know to call you?
I'm not sure. I don't know if they knew I was building them or not, but they
Hmm.
found me. And I said, yes, I'd love to be a
Of
dealer.
course.
And then I've started, I have a relationship with Bill Holowati there at Mira, and he's still there. So my buddy at Chad Embry, Fujikura, still there. My buddy at Mira, Bill Holowati's still there. I was off and running with Mira in like 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And been with them ever since. And they've been very good to me. And occasionally we'll do some large deals together, which is a lot of fun. Like bulk buys, and that's a lot of fun too.
And they still keep everything in house. They do all their manufacturing, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. So how it works? There's a company that owns the distribution rights. 8 a.m. Golf. Howard Milstein is the money behind that. They own the distribution rights. But the Mura factory, which is owned by Mr. Mura and his two sons, is in Japan. And they make everything right there. Now, they have outsourced a product or two. Mm-hmm. In the past, they might have a cast product they outsource, and they will tell you it's outsourced. They approved it. But all the Ford that we know them for a name for are done right there in-house in Himeji or Hamaji, Japan. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but
have you been over there? Have you been to their factory and their plant?
I have been invited. My buddy Bill Holowati has invited me to go. I don't travel very well, so I should go. I'd love to go. I have the utmost respect for Mira, but I've heard from the minute you leave your house to the minute you walk on their floor, it's 24 hours later.
Yeah, that's
time
a tough
you do
one.
all your connections. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
but I should do it. And, the videos I've seen in the factory, I know I'd be a kid in a candy store, could probably just sit around and watch for days.
Have they always been a golf club company? Like Ping was an engineering company, aeronautical, if I'm not mistaken. I've had 3 of their engineers on the show.
Yeah, Mr. Solheim, I believe, was an engineer.
Yes, he was an engineer, and I believe his aeronautics, where they were doing that was like the big part of their business. I don't remember how much the engineering department of Ping or if it's a parent company. So I don't know the dynamics of that.
Yeah,
but I know
I actually know the backstory to Mira.
Yeah, that was what I was going to get at.
Yeah.
Is there? Did they start in golf, or were they in something else? And then
no, golf. So Mr. He's around about 84. We'll say he's 84. When he was a kid, I'm gonna say 16, he apprenticed with Kyoei. A lot of people don't know that, and he was in their wood department, Persimmon Woods, and he saw some of the guys that were working on irons. The sparks going up and the grinding, and he inquired if he could get in that side of the business. They said, well, that's real hard. It's real difficult. And he got in it, did his apprenticeship with Kyoei. And, they talk about the 1957 series. So I'm thinking about 1957 is when we're talking about Mr. Mira getting started. And he ultimately left Kyoei to establish his own company because he had ideas he thought were even more advanced than what was currently being done, and
Mm-hmm.
that has proved to be the case. This not welding, but spin fusion of the hosels to the head, because you are trading atoms on each side of that hosel and head. So it's not a weld, it's a fusion where he could work on the head, get it perfect, then fuse the hosel into it. And so I get mirror heads, and I'll tell you, they say a half gram tolerance, they are not kidding. A lot of times I'll put in my scales and I get the exact same thing to the gram. So anyway, Mr. Miura, that's his story, from apprentice woodworking to moving over to grinding to ultimately launching his old company. So that's pretty much all his life what he's done. He's got his two sons involved, which are both probably around 50, give or take. And they're very passionate about it. He still goes and turns on the lights in the morning. He's done some designs. I'm going to show you something here. Here's a KM 700. It looks left-handed, but it's right-handed.
Mm-hmm.
KM 700 is apparently his last design. He terrific, terrific design. He is really into how a clubhead enters the turf. He'll watch people hit. You think he's looking at the shot? He's watching the head go through the dirt.
Hmm.
He's really into that interaction. So he definitely comes from a different angle on the way he looks at things. And then he's meticulous as heck. He's very prideful. So he's only going to want to do it if it's perfect. That's why they were going to throw away that wedge Scott grind. They weren't going to fix it. It was going in the trash. They remelt it and start over. Anyway.
From the clubs that I've seen his, and I haven't, like I said, I was out of golf for some time. Well, I shouldn't say out of golf. I was out of the loop with seeing the newest, greatest things are coming out every year, every couple of years. And I always remembered that, as you mentioned, club interaction with turf, he always had a very subtle bevel on the leading edge. It wasn't sharp. It had just a very, like a 1 degree or 1.5 degree curve to it, and
Yep.
always made things, at least for here in the U.S., with the softer conditions we have as a whole,
Right.
easier to cut through the ground. I'm sure Europe, he probably modified it because they're playing in much firmer
Yeah,
conditions.
no, you're nailing it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So here's a wedge here. This is a 50 to gram. See the little front edge bevel?
Mm-hmm.
That's called a Y grind. Exactly what you're talking about, and that's going to give you a little higher bounce. Exactly what you talked about, and but they call that a Y grind, and it's right there, right on the front edge. And then another one of their new edges. This is more of a sole grind. It's a C grind. You can see the C on it. These are two current models, but yeah, that Y grind, that front edge grind prevents digging. Exactly what you said.
Yeah, that's amazing that they could get to 1/2 a degree or less on the weighting of the heads.
They do. They do.
Because when there were some companies when I was doing, again, 19, 20 years ago, and who is it? My Golf Spy guys, I think they're the ones that do the reviews, and they really gave Callaway a hard time on their golf balls. And going back years ago, Callaway and TaylorMade had by far the worst weighting on their irons. When I would pull the clubs apart and weigh all the heads, they would have
tip weights.
Yeah, they would have 4 to 7. I mean, 4 to I'm sorry, sometimes 7 to 10 grams difference.
Right.
From I'm like,
I'm not going to pick. I'll say Mira doesn't fall in this category. I'm not going to pick on any OEMs, but you are correct. I have taken apart many an OEM club, and you weigh the head, and then you look in the shaft, and there's a 6, 7, 8 gram tip weight in there that's making up for the head not being the correct weight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not good.
I think they've all tightened since. Yeah, they've all tightened their tolerances since. Because you can't get away with that in today's world. Not the internet. It spreads way too fast.
It does.
You better have your game together.
Yeah, back to my buddy Bill Hollywood. He says they weigh a club, every club head. This is unbelievable when I say this, 14 times.
God, measure twice, cut once. They take that to extreme, times 7.
That's the Japanese for you. Yeah, I was like, gosh, they're just weighing clubs all day long. But apparently they go through, and they have the billet, the hot billet. They pound it down into the die. They hit it 3 times, so you get a very tight molecular structure, because that third strike tightens up the molecular structure. So mirror heads get good ball speeds because they're so dense.
Mm-hmm.
But they get it out and they start profiling it. In other words, it's not in finished shape. They've got to grind that product to the final shape, and they can replicate it and get the weight right. It's definitely an art.
Have they discussed that with you? Because I'm curious, and I'm sure a lot of people out there listening are, is because as they they forge it, and that press comes in, or that stamp comes in, let's
Yeah.
say 3 times, and then there's, as you're talking about, there's the residual that gets pressed off of the
Yes.
cutout. But for many people listening, if you're not aware of it, let's say a cookie cutter. We'll
Yeah,
just say that
exactly. No,
there's
that's exactly how it
yeah.
looks.
So
Yep.
there's excess around, and it's amazing. Even if you start with let's say all the billets were the same,
Yeah,
or within a half a gram, but you're cutting off some of the metal because
you are.
it's on the perimeter, and then uh, you're grinding it down for them to come out. Do they separate? Let's say they have them, and I can't. I'm going to really draw blanks on this. Let's say a set of 6 irons, and they have it at a certain weight,
Right.
uh, 265 grams. Would they
Yeah,
keep the
they'll use a
200?
certain size billet and a certain hosel because they come in two parts initially. Yeah, yeah.
And if some are at 265, and let's say some come in at 263, are they separating them out and keeping them in the same bin so when they build a set, it's all congruent?
I'm going to make an assumption. I assume that the answer is yes to that. I do
Okay.
not know that for a fact. And I think what they can do, they're such artful grinders. If they've got to get rid of a half a gram here or there, they know how to do it and blend it. Because I think realistically speaking, they probably have to, they're weighing it and they're like, oh, this thing's off a half. Well, I'm going to profile it just a teeny bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You'd never see it even if you had two identical ones side by side. But I would think there would have to be some fine tuning. And that's the reason they're weighing it so many times. Because the only reason you keep weighing it is you might need to fine tune it.
Yes.
So I think that must be what they're really, really close. And then in the grind process, there's a very minimal chance to get it right. And if for some reason something happens that's not right, they'll just throw it back in the pile and it'll get heated back into a rod and start all over again because you can keep doing it. But I don't think they have much of that. I think
that has got to drive some of the guys crazy that they sit there and they just miss one little thing, or they put a little too much force or pressure into that grinding wheel and it takes off just a little too much. I would imagine that they have a very lengthy apprenticeship for anyone who wants to work for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. They can't ramp up and all of a sudden make a ton of clubs more than they're doing now because of the long lead time in an apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. I think they got 28 employees there, and I think the average tenure is 20 years. I mean, it's crazy. They get there, they stay there, but they're trained, they're really good at what they do, and they've got a lot of experience. But I think they've got it down so much that there's very little waste. There's very little waste or wasted movement. I mean, it's just they know what they're doing. They know how to get to where they need to get. But it's pretty neat when you see them profile sanding those heads and they're flipping them around, and you're like, they're getting these things to a gram, or half gram.